All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Helen Stock from the MGA, and today we are here with a great friend to the MGA, Jimmy Roberts of NBC Sports. Jimmy, thank you for coming on here today, and we are excited to talk golf with you. But how are you doing at home these days and working remotely yourself?
Well, first of all, hi, Helen. I hope everybody's well who's hearing this, seeing this, watching this. These are interesting times. Um, my family, we're all well. We're going a little stir crazy. It's such a beautiful day today. Great day for golf. I wish I could have played, but I'm kind of nursing a little bit of a knee injury. So that's the headline for me today. Professionally, it's been kind of crazy. You and I were just talking a moment ago. I still do television for NBC, only it's just a very unusual setup. I'm in my living room with a bunch of lights and, a device that functions as a camera. It's actually pretty good and a whole audio setup. Only difference is now when I do, updates on the weekend, I can do it with my dog sitting at my feet, which is kind of comforting. Doing a lot of cooking, too much eating, not enough exercising. We're alternately getting to know each other better in my house and getting sick of each other in my house. And I'm sure that our story is exactly like everybody else's.
Well, I think everybody is certainly in the same boat, but I'm glad everyone is safe and healthy. And I know we're all looking forward to getting back on the golf course soon, really to see the start of competitive golf, both here in our area and nationally. But we thought it would be fun today, since we always see you interviewing others, to turn it around and ask you some questions. And we did receive a number of questions from our followers on social media. So I think there are some fun ones in there. But just to give
Uh-oh.
our just to give our viewers a little bit of a background, you live locally in Westchester, and again, you've been a great friend to the MGA for a long time. You have a regular column in our magazine, The Met Golfer, and you also received our Distinguished Service Award in 2016. So while we know you've been all over the world to cover sports and golf as one of them, we also know that you're local and you know Met area golf as well. So to start, I'll give you an easy one. This was our most submitted question that came in, but when you are home and you are local, what are your favorite Met area courses to play? And do you have any favorite particular holes?
So I'm a member at Westchester Country Club and at Hudson National. So those are our numbers 1 and 2. And I say this, and anybody who's from the Met area knows this because we live here and we're so fortunate and we see this and we live this. But I have literally traveled all over the world watching golf, having had the great good fortune to occasionally play it in some pretty exotic places. There is nowhere on earth, not the Monterey Peninsula, not Scotland, not anywhere that has the number of world-class golf courses that we are blessed with here in the New York area. Not Chicago. Chicago has great golf courses. And it's no disrespect to any place else, but I mean, you could just go on and on and on and on. I grew up caddying at Fenway in White Plains. Had a chance to go back there this year for the first time in a long time. What a great place that is. I am particularly fond of Century Country Club. I always have the same line about Century. I say it's a stout enough challenge that it will put the world's best golfers to the test, because we know that because we see every couple of years there's sectional qualifying for the US Open there. And but it's also not so overwhelming that it turns away or makes average golfers unhappy. I just think it's got something for everybody, and it's always in such magnificent shape. And Nelson Long is just one of the great professionals that I've ever met. So Century's a great place. Sleepy Hollow. I mean, I'm probably going to insult somebody by not mentioning, the place that they play, but I could just literally go on and on and on. They're just all over the place. It's funny when I talk about a place like Fenway. So, people who aren't from here, they know Wingfoot and they know Baltusrol and they know all the great courses, championship courses that are internationally known. And maybe they know a place like Westchester Country Club, and maybe they know a place like Sleepy Hollow. But chances are they've never heard of Fenway. It's, a great Tillinghast course. And there are, dozens of courses just like that all over the Met section. So I'm not sure if I've exactly answered your questions in terms of holes. Oh, and I grew up playing at a municipal in White Plains. I love Maplemore and Saxon Woods. There are just so many great places to play around here. In terms of holes, whichever one I play well, that's my favorite hole.
I think that's my motto as well. But we are very lucky that pretty much everywhere we turn here in the Met area, we have a great golf course. And speaking of Fenway, I know you mentioned that you grew up caddying there. I've heard you talk about that in the past, but how were you first introduced to golf? And looking back on those caddying days at Fenway, what were those days like to you now that you can look back on those?
So my parents played golf, and so that was my original introduction to golf. And, when I first started playing, we belonged to a club. We belonged to what was then called Bel Air, which was in Armonk, and then it became the Canyon Club. And I'm not sure what it has been lately, but played some golf there, took lessons from a pro named Jack Kiley. And as I said in the book that I wrote, I developed a flawed swing that stayed with me my entire life, and I've been fighting it ever since. But I played most of my golf growing up at public courses with friends. I played when I first started writing for the Westchester Rockland newspapers, the Gannett papers. Everybody played, and we'd work all night, and we'd get out at 7 in the morning, 6 in the morning, and we'd go right to the golf course and we'd play. And then we'd have lunch, and then go home and go to sleep. And it was a lot of fun. I think that's the first time I got introduced to the whole idea of how much fun it was to be with other people and how great and social a game golf is.
You did mention you're a member at Westchester Country Club, which is set to host the 2021 U.S. Women's Amateur. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you know the course very well. Mm-hmm. What is some advice you would give to the women who will be competing there on the famed West course?
Well, it's funny. So my good friend and colleague, Roger Maltby, who played on the PGA Tour and won 5 times on tour, one of his wins was at Westchester in what was then called the Westchester Classic. And so we talk about Westchester all the time. He says that Westchester still, to his way of thinking, has the 18 greatest greens on the PGA Tour, the greatest green complexes there are. The way the course used to be set up, there's a real premium on hitting greens, because depending on how the course is set up, and Dave Dodonis, who's the superintendent there, does a magnificent job. And, the course has undergone a transformation in the last, probably 10 years. But, when you grow the rough around the greens at Westchester, you do not want to miss, the greens, because they're so treacherous, just in terms of the undulation and, their topography. They're really, they're not simple. So I think my advice to, the players who are obviously an awful lot better than I'll ever even dream of being is that, don't be lulled into thinking that because this isn't the longest of courses that you can just bludgeon it, because that can very easily kind of get turned on its head, and you can end up limping around and then limping in.
Wingfoot is really right down the road from Westchester Country Club. What has been your experience playing there, and how do you think the course will play in September for the U.S. Open?
I think it's great. I have so many friends at Wingfoot. Dan Hicks, who was our golf host at NBC, is one of my best friends. He's at Wingfoot. We frequently play home and home, and I've got lots of other friends there too. And I don't know that anybody really needs to talk about how great a place Wingfoot is. It's just magnificent. And not only the West course, but the East course as well. And Colin Burns just really sets the standard in terms of the way that job is done and has for so many years. I think about Wingfoot, and I think about a story. So when I first got involved in the industry, I worked at ABC Sports, and this is when I was on the other side of the camera, and it was in the 80s and the late 70s, and in the 80s, early 80s. And I was working on the golf telecasts, and I worked with the great Dave Maher. And Dave had been an assistant there to Claude Harmon. And he told a great story about how when he was working for Claude, he was out one night for a drink at a tavern. Dave always went to taverns, never restaurants or bars. There was always a tavern. And Dave went out one night, and he's sitting at the bar having a drink, and he's wearing a shirt like this, what we now call a golf shirt or a polo shirt. And I guess back then, they weren't as common. And so a guy sits down next to him at the bar and says, "So you a golfer?" And Dave says, "Yeah." He doesn't know who Dave is. And he said, "Yeah." He says, you ever hear of that place in Mamaroneck, Wingfoot?" And Dave, still not letting on, says, "Yeah." And he says, "You know anything? You know that 10th hole, which of course is the great par 3 on the West Course with those enormous bunkers, particularly the one on the right?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "You know that 10th hole?" And at this point, Dave's just about had it, and he turns to the guy and he says, "Do I know the bunkers on the 10th hole on the West Course at Wingfoot? I have my mail delivered to those bunkers." And that was just typical Dave. I obviously don't tell the story the way he told it, because he could read the newspaper and be funny. But I often think of Dave when I think of Wingfoot, because he was one of the greatest people I have ever known in the industry, one of the kindest people, one of the most talented people, one of the most natural broadcasters you will ever see. And I think of him a lot when I think of Wingfoot.
That's a great story. I think we'll all be thinking of him and that story the next time we see 10th at Wingfoot and those bunkers. But speaking of September and the majors scheduled for this year, what's your take on that schedule? I mean, if everything goes according to plan, we'll be set for a great fall of golf. And especially for Wingfoot, I think there's no better spot for fall golf than the Northeast. But one question, what do you think about the possibility of a Ryder Cup with no fans?
Well, let me just get back and answer the question, your previous question, which I didn't fully answer. A fall U.S. Open at Wingfoot, I think that, those of us who live here, one of the things we marvel at every year, I know I do, is how magnificent this area is in the fall. And I just think it's just going to be so spectacular. I often say the single best month of the year where we all live is September. It's just spectacular. And, I just think it's going to be beautiful. I think the courses are going to be the course is going to be in great condition. Grass loves to grow in September. Cool nights. It's not quite as hot. Maybe you'll get some color in the trees, which could be just really beautiful. But I think that, it's ironic because we've all been shut in for so long. Well, if things work out the way they are scheduled to work out, we're going to be shut in again in the fall, but it's going to be by choice, because we're just going to be watching the greatest sporting events week after week after week. They're going to be on every weekend. The great, golf tournaments, the Kentucky Derby, the French Open, Wimbledon. It's going to be Wimbledon was canceled this year. It's just going to be crazy. It's going to be like drinking from a fire hose for sports fans. The Ryder Cup without fans. It'd be a shame. Rory McIlroy said the other day he doesn't want to do it. And listen, he would only benefit by being able to play a Ryder Cup, an away Ryder Cup, and not have to listen to the abuse. But it's just not the character of the event. The Ryder Cup is unlike any other event there is. I don't always love I love the energy. I don't always love kind of the way it plays out in terms of behavior. It would just be really, really weird. I mean, I think there are a lot of factors that will influence what happens. There are a lot of constituencies that need to talk about it. It's not only the PGA of America, but, the PGA Tour is going to I'm sure, be involved in having discussions with the PGA of America about what happens. So it'll be different. I cannot imagine being out on those fairways, and it'd be like a $5 Nassau at your club on the weekend, early in the morning. That's bizarre. So strange.
It would certainly be a little weird, especially given the last few times it's been played. It seems like the fan experience and those grandstands on the first tee are such a big deal, but I guess we'll see what comes this fall.
Listen,
So,
Helen, let me interrupt you 1 second.
mhm.
You make a good point. I know if people are watching, this conversation, they're obviously big golf fans. I would say that if you have not been to a Ryder Cup, you need to go to a Ryder Cup, because there is nothing in golf like the Ryder Cup. I mean, it will infuriate you because you probably won't have an opportunity to see as much as you'd like to see. But the energy at a Ryder Cup, you can feel it. And when it's close and the result is in question, one of the greatest memories that I have in covering sports happened at a Ryder Cup. So this is 1995 at Oak Hill. And the Americans had a lead. They blew it. And Lanny Watkins was the captain of that team. And so after the matches are over, there's a closing ceremony. And both teams, they put on their blazers and they parade in and they get up on a stage. And Lanny, who's one of the most intensely competitive people you will ever meet, he gets up there to give a speech, and he goes up and he puts his glasses on and he starts to read his speech, and he starts talking about his team, and he gets very, very choked up. And it's a very uncomfortable moment, but it only lasted for a moment, because as he's kind of struggling to find the words and get a hold of his emotions, here comes the other captain, Bernard Gallagher, who had been a losing captain a couple of times. And he walks up to Lanny, he puts his arm around him on this stage, and he takes his notes and he says, "Here, my friend, let me help you out with that. I've been through this a couple of times myself." It was one of the greatest moments in sports that I have ever seen.
Wow.
And I remember Brad Faxon, making his first Ryder Cup by shooting 65 in the final round at Riviera in the PGA Championship, just completely overwhelmed and sobbing in the parking lot, when it was all over. It's just so hard to communicate how meaningful this is to the players, and the result of that is the energy that exists. I could go on and on and on with a million stories, because there are a million of them.
And they're all great. And I was just watching the other day a replay of the War at the Shore at Kiowa, and that was such a special year too. And to see that all unfold was really cool to rewatch it now.
Mhm.
So again, we'll see what the fall brings. Hopefully there will be fans. Hopefully it'll be just as exciting. And you did take one of my questions for later on too, about most memorable moments. But
Sorry about that.
I'm sure you have plenty. So I liked this question that came in for you. Are there any local courses here in the Met area that you want to play that you never have?
I think the one that's at the top of the list that I've never played, that I've always wanted to, is Fisher's Island. And I mean, I don't know if that qualifies as local. I mean, it's here.
They're an MGA member club.
Oh, is that right?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I think Fisher's Island, you hear so much about it, and it just sounds so different. One of these days, hopefully.
I have never been, but I've heard you have to have two things there. One is the Fisher's Island lemonade, and the second is a specialty peanut butter and bacon sandwich on the golf.
I'm in. I'm in. You know what?
Sounds pretty good.
What's better than that?
Right. So now, anywhere in the world, obviously you've been all over the place. What is the best golf trip you've ever been on?
You know something? Having this discussion right now reminds me of something I neglected to say before, but you asked me about favorite golf holes.
Mm-hmm.
How about 17 at National, which is just so much fun.
You can't.
Let me just say this. How about this? Any hole at National, okay? And the south side that follows. So best golf trip. A bunch of friends, we used to have a little golf trip, which we modestly called the Fall Classic. And we used to put together a trip, and it was prior to the existence of the FedEx Cup. So this was in the fall when we had some time off. We used to, the end of our golf season was the summer, and come the fall, we had a little bit of time off until the Ryder Cup or the President's Cup. So a bunch of us would get together, and originally the idea was no flying because we'd all spent way too much time flying. And I will just say this, the best golf trip was the first one we did, which was National, Maidstone, Shinnecock, and it was the year of the US Open. And then on the way back home, the black course at Bethpage. So, and it was great because didn't have to get on an airplane and got to play literally 4 of the greatest golf courses on earth. But, I'm lucky. It's, because of what I do for a living, I've had an opportunity to play at a lot of wonderful places. Made a trip to Scotland with some friends prior to the Ryder Cup a few years back, and that was just magnificent. The Philadelphia courses, we've done that, great. Monterey Peninsula, great. I said it before, but made a golf trip to Chicago. Hard to talk about how great some of those golf courses are. If you've never played at a place called Shore Acres, you need to go look at that place. It's pretty amazing. We played some in Australia when we were there for the President's Cup. I'm a lucky guy.
What about a bucket list course or destination for golf anywhere in the world?
I think I'd like to go to the 2 Kaiser places. I'd like to go to Cabot Links, and I've never been to Bandon Dunes. So I think I'd like to try those places. And I guess I'll get there. I have a job and a family, so and a bunch of other things I'm involved in, and I'm not that good a golfer, so it's I got other things going on. I do love the game of golf. I love being on the golf course with my friends, and with new people too. I mean, just the whole idea. My wife doesn't play golf, and I trying to explain to her a long time ago, the 3 greatest things about golf are that golf courses are usually incredibly beautiful places, and you're going for, a 4-hour walk. You're playing a game. I'm a kid. I like to play, I'm getting outside and I'm playing, challenging myself. And the last part about it is you get to spend time with people that you like, or people that you really truly are getting to know. And again, people who are watching this, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. That's what I love about it. As frustrating as it is, it's such a great experience.
Speaking of being all over the world, you've seen a number of sporting events, not just golf. We talked about one of your most memorable golf events that you've seen. What about a non-golf event? What stands out as the most memorable in your career?
Well, I think the most memorable event that I've ever seen or been a part of or covered was at the 1994 Olympic Games in Lillehammer, Norway, when Dan Jansen won his gold medal in the 1,000 meters. And I don't want to bore everybody with the details, but what that guy went through and almost gave it up and didn't, and suffered such disappointment and tragedy, and stuck with it, and eventually, just at the point at which it looked like it was all going to disappear, he won a gold medal under extraordinary circumstances. And I, to this day, always say the same thing. In terms of the greatest things I've ever seen, there's not even a silver medal. That's the gold medal, and it's the best thing I've ever seen. Again, we don't have enough time. I won't bore you with the details. It's easy enough to Google if you don't know Dan Jansen's story. But that was a remarkable thing to be in that arena that day and see that happen. Never seen anything like it. I think, and I mentioned this the other day in talking to some folks, I think the most memorable thing that I've ever been part of as a broadcaster was at the 2002 Olympic Games in Salt Lake City. I did the interview with I was given the assignment to do the interview with the person or people who were going to light the Olympic flame. And so what that meant was I was up there at the top of the stadium, right next to the cauldron, watching the torch relay with all these great American icons and Olympians kind of wend their way through the stadium. And I mean, I knew who I was going to be interviewing. I had been told the day before, but it was the 1980 Miracle on Ice team. And I had this really unique view because I was watching the torch as it made its way towards us. And then I would kind of steal a look in the wings because nobody knew that they were going to be the ones who were going to be lighting the torch. And they were just as excited as if they were, 15-year-old kids and all in their Olympic jerseys and, getting very, very excited. And it was not long after 9/11. There was a tremendous sense of patriotism. I was uniquely aware that I was standing literally at the top of the world, interviewing these people, and there were 80,000 people or maybe more in the stadium, but there were hundreds of millions of people all over the world watching this. And it was a very humbling experience. And I'll never forget it. I've had some great good fortune in my life, professionally, personally. It was a little breathtaking to me. And I still look back on it and think that I can't believe it happened.
That must have been just awesome to watch and be a part of. And I'm sure you have a long list of great memories and great places you've been. So it's great for us to hear some of the background and the behind the scenes of those stories. But somewhat speaking of that, so say now it's a typical week on the PGA Tour and you're there, you're working. How do you prepare to cover an event?
When I'm working on the PGA Tour, most times I'm in a tower calling golf on Thursday and Friday, and then on Saturday morning as well. So I'll be out on the golf course, looking at the golf course, seeing how it's playing, if there are any changes. I mean, we do tend to go back to the same places year after year. So I'm pretty familiar with places like Bay Hill and TPC Sawgrass and places like that. But so I'll go out and I'll look at the golf course. I'll spend some time on the range, the putting green, talking to players, kind of getting some biographical information, shooting the breeze, trying to harvest some anecdotes that I can share, and just keep my ear to the ground. So that's how I prepare. And then also, I do feature stories, so I'll be working on those as well. So a little bit of everything.
A lot of everything going on for you, I'm sure. We did have a number of some other good quick questions submitted from some of our followers. So one of them, since you've been to all these events, you know all these tour players, you've seen them all, who do you think will be the next superstar on tour who will play for many years, win dozens of events, maybe a handful of majors?
Well, I think we're already kind of seeing it. Justin Thomas. Surprised Ricky Fowler hasn't won a major by now, but I'm sure he's surprised too. It's like what Phil Mickelson used to say was, when he would constantly get asked, if he was frustrated not having won a major, and he would say, before he won that first Masters in what was it, 04, he said, I would have thought I would have won several by now. So I think this young crop of players, I don't know that I have an answer for you in terms of a betting favorite, somebody that isn't who you might know of already. But I think this young crop of players is remarkable. Justin Thomas, Rory McIlroy, Ricky Fowler, Xander Schauffele, Jordan Spieth, who's been struggling the last couple of years, but extraordinary. I mean, these guys all get it. They're really very, very talented, very personable. I think they're great for the game of golf. And so many people wonder what's going to happen after Tiger doesn't play competitive golf anymore. Is anybody going to care? I hope so. We forget is that golf always was something of a niche sport. There are times outlying times, like when Arnold Palmer was extraordinarily popular, or when Jack Nicklaus was, certainly when Tiger has been. But golf has never been the NFL, and I think it would be foolish to kind of aspire to be that. Golf is quirky. Golf doesn't appeal to everybody, but to those of us who love it, it's a great game, and I think anybody who says golf is like watching paint dry, needs to get their eyesight checked. I mean, I have literally been involved covering golf tournaments, where my heart is beating so fast, and I'm sure that that's the way a lot of people feel. I mean, you tell me that's the way you feel watching the second nine at Augusta on Sunday, and I'll just tell you you're a liar. It's I don't know that I have an answer for you on that one, Helen, but there's a lot of good ones out there.
There definitely are. That young talent, I think we'll be seeing a lot more of all of those guys and some more up and comers. What about who would be some of the players on tour who you'd most enjoy getting a beer with after a round?
Well, we all have our favorites and our friends. I really enjoy Paul Casey's company. I've spent some time with Paul. He's a really smart guy, thoughtful, funny. Paul Goydos, who plays now on the PGA Tour Champions, is one of my all-time favorites. Davis Love has become a good friend over the years. I'm not really sure. Again, I'd have to really think hard about it there too. It's just like anything else. At your job, there are people who you like and people you don't like, and people who like you and people who don't like you. That's just life. Although I'm sure nobody doesn't like Helen Stock. I'm sure of that. It's just that's just the way it goes. I've met a bunch of people that I'm very, very fond of. Steve Stricker's a great guy. Curtis Strange, I have a great relationship with. Brad Faxon, who I mentioned before. Some of these are older guys, but I'd have to think about it. I'm really fond of Jordan Spieth. I just really like him a lot. I mean, I covered him when he won the U.S. Junior at Trump at Bedminster.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember then he just seemed beyond his years, and he still does. He's just a really nice guy.
I don't think you can go wrong with anyone on that list. Outside of golf, what are some of your other hobbies or interests? I know you mentioned you've been cooking a lot, but I also heard you were a big lacrosse player growing up. Is there any lacrosse still going on?
Listen, that's ancient history. But when I was younger, I still love the game, and I still follow the game. And I'm a proud University of Maryland alum and fan. And one of the greatest moments in sports for me was when they won the national championship in 2017. I was a decent player, decent enough to get, some interest from places like Maryland, but I wasn't good enough to play there. And, ironically, it's because I wasn't good enough to play there that I got my start in television, because I got cut from the team and then I ended up broadcasting the team on the radio. And that first year, the NCAA Lacrosse Championship was on ABC's Wide World of Sports, and I went to work for them, and that was my first job in television. I say to the coach of the Maryland team, one of the great honors that I've ever had was that I was invited back to speak to the Maryland team in 2017, and one of the things that I told them was that, as painful as it probably was at the time, probably one of the best things that ever happened to me was not being good enough to play on that team. So, because it ended up being the portal to the rest of my professional life. But I like to cook, love to cook. I like to putt around the house. I got a big workbench downstairs, try and do as much DIY stuff as I can. I love to write. I'm writing another book. I finished another book, so I got enough stuff going on.
What's one of your cooking specialties that you've been working on in the kitchen lately?
Well, today, as we speak, there's a 10-pound pork butt on the smoker in my backyard. And
wow.
I'm hoping that turns out okay. I think my family is hoping that turns out okay also. but one of my favorite recipes, I love making there's a grilled bronzino recipe that I make. I make a decent amatriciana sauce. You know, whatever. I like to cook because I like to eat. And I like to drink wine, so it all goes hand in hand.
Even better.
Right?
So I will wrap things up here with a question we've been asking people who we've been talking to and interviewing with. And it's a big question. It's non-sports related, but what is on your Netflix right now?
So last night it's not really Netflix, but we watched the last episode of Homeland, which was pretty good. Netflix, we've been watching Fauda, which is an Israeli kind of thriller series. That's pretty good. What else have we been watching on Netflix?
There's too much on there.
There is too much on there. I know last night we downloaded Gladiator. I can't wait to see that again for about the 100th time. But do we have a minute? Because I want to tell a story.
Yeah, of course.
Somebody asked me about this, and I had forgotten about this. It's truly people ask me all the time, do I have any favorite golf stories? And this is my favorite because it's absolutely 100% true. So this happens, and I'm guessing that there are probably a number of people who've already heard this in some iteration. Perhaps not for me, but I tell it all the time when I speak publicly because I love the story. But this goes back to the late 1980s. And Seve Ballesteros is playing in a charity match against a fellow named Tony Johnstone, who's from Zimbabwe. Tony's now 63 years old. Good golfer on the European Tour, was an assistant captain to Nick Price on a couple of President's Cup teams. But what distinguishes Tony most is that he is the polar opposite of Seve Ballesteros, or was. Because as serious and as hard-bitten as Seve was on the golf course, Tony was carefree, a joker, talking to a million people, had a lot of Lee Trevino in him where that's concerned. So the two of these guys are playing against each other in a charity match in the Netherlands. And Seve, as was his way, is playing this thing like it's the Ryder Cup. He is intense, not saying a word to Tony the whole time. And Tony's talking to the gallery, talking to folks who are there. A couple hundred people are out there. Finally, they come to, I guess it was the 14th hole, and I guess I can't say all square anymore, can I? They're even, right? Isn't that the correct terminology now?
Yes. Yeah, correct.
The match is even, okay? And this is a par 4, straight away, blind tee shot up over a hill. They both hit their tee shots. Johnstone takes off walking first, and Seve crests the hill, and he sees Johnstone standing in the middle of the fairway looking down at a ball, and it's right next to a sprinkler head. And Tony says, hey, Seve, come here. He says, look at this. Take a look at this. What do you think, relief? And Seve goes over and he looks at the ball and he goes, no. And Johnstone now is furious. And he gets up in his face and he says, you listen to me. He says, we've been out here for 2.5 hours. You haven't said a word to me the whole time. That is not in the spirit of what this is supposed to be about. So I'm just going to ask you one more time. You take a look at that ball and you tell me, relief or not? And Seve leans in and he gets right in Johnstone's face and he says, no, you must play the ball as it lies. And Johnstone shakes his head and he walks away and he says, that's too bad, because you know what, pal? That's your ball.
Oh.
Anyway, I know the story's true because years ago when I met Tony Johnstone, I asked him about it and I said to him, please just tell me that this really happened and it isn't the story that I've been telling forever that's apocryphal. And they said, nope, it happened. And it's my favorite golf story.
Wow, that is certainly a good one. I have not heard that before, so that's a great one. I'm sure we could keep you here all day sharing these golf stories, but we'll let you get back to that dinner you're working on. Let us know how it comes out. And thank you again for joining us today, Jimmy. Wishing you and your family all the best, and we will see you out on the golf course soon enough.
Helen, it's been my pleasure. I hope everybody out there is safe, and I'm sure you're like me. We all can't wait to get back to playing golf safely and enjoying the greatest game there is.